A cowboy's proposal in the rain. He needed a mother. She needed a home. The lightning split the sky like God's own anger. And Ezra Blackwood knew he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Or perhaps, the most necessary one. Rain drummed against the wooden porch of his modest homestead, each drop carrying with it the weight of desperation that had brought him to this moment. Inside the small cabin, two little girls slept fitfully. Clara, barely 6, and Rose, just turned 4, both motherless for nearly a year now. Their fevered dreams were haunted by the same question that kept Ezra awake most nights. What would become of them? The answer stood before him now, soaked to the bone and shivering in the storm. "Miss Evangeline," Ezra began, his voice barely audible above the thunder. "I know this ain't how proper folks do things, but ... double quotes, 3 weeks earlier, the autumn sun had painted the Wyoming territory in shades of gold and amber. Ezra had been mending fence posts when he first saw her, a young woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, helping Mrs. Henderson with her vegetable garden in town. Evangeline Murphy, the widow Henderson had called her. Irish, like so many who'd come west seeking something better than what they'd left behind. Ezra had made inquiries as discreetly as a widowed rancher with 2 young daughters could manage. What he learned painted a picture of quiet desperation that mirrored his own. Evangeline's husband had died of fever just 6 months after their arrival in Sweetwater Creek. She'd been working odd jobs ever since, washing clothes, tending gardens, cleaning houses, barely earning enough to keep herself fed and housed in the boarding house's smallest room. She needed stability. He needed help. It seemed like providence, even if it wasn't love. "You understand what I'm proposing, Miss Murphy?" Ezra had asked during their first awkward conversation outside the general store. His hat had been clutched tight in his weathered hands, his dark hair catching the afternoon light. Evangeline had studied his face carefully, those intelligent gray eyes searching for something honest, perhaps, or at least the absence of cruelty. "You're asking for a marriage of convenience, Mr. Blackwood. You need someone to care for your daughters, and I need ... She had paused, pride warring with practicality in her expression. "I need a home." Their courtship, if it could be called that, had been measured in practical conversations and careful observations. Ezra would bring the girls to town on Sundays after church, and Evangeline would walk with them, listening to their chatter about wildflowers and baby calves. Clara, shy but perceptive, had warmed to her quickly. Rose, still grieving her mother in ways she couldn't articulate, remained cautiously distant. "She makes good biscuits," Clara had whispered to her father one evening, "and she doesn't get angry when Rose cries." It wasn't love, but it was enough, or so Ezra had thought. The wedding had been planned for the following Saturday, a simple affair at the small church, with Mrs. Henderson and the preacher as witnesses. Nothing fancy, nothing romantic, just 2 people making a practical arrangement to survive in an unforgiving world. But then the storm had come. It started Friday evening with distant thunder and the smell of rain on dusty earth. By nightfall, the wind was howling like a wounded animal, and by dawn, the creek had swollen beyond its banks. The bridge to town was washed out. The preacher was stranded on the other side, and their carefully planned ceremony was impossible. That's when Ezra had made his decision. He'd saddled his horse and ridden through the storm to the boarding house, his mind made up. If they couldn't have a proper wedding, they'd have something else instead, something that mattered more than ceremony or convention. "Miss Evangeline," he said now, water dripping from the brim of his hat as she stood on the boarding house porch, "I've come to ask you something, and I need you to know that whatever your answer, it comes from an honest place." Lightning illuminated her face, and he saw something there he hadn't expected, not just acceptance or resignation, but something that looked almost like hope. "I've been thinking about why we're doing this," Ezra continued, his voice growing stronger despite the storm, "about what we told ourselves it was practical, sensible, to people helping each other survive." He took a step closer, close enough that he could see the rain droplets caught in her dark lashes. "But that's not the whole truth, is it?" Evangeline's breath caught. "Ezra, ... these past weeks, watching you with my girls, seeing how gentle you are with Rose when she has her nightmares, how you listen when Clara tells you about the birds she's seen ... That's not duty, Evangeline. That's not just someone doing a job." The rain seemed to soften around them, though the storm still raged. Inside the boarding house, a lamp flickered in a window, casting warm light onto the porch where they stood. "And when you look at me," Ezra went on, his voice barely above a whisper, "when you smile at something I've said, or when you worry about whether the girls are eating enough, that's not the look of someone just seeking shelter." Evangeline's hands were shaking, and not from the cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between I need and you need, something else happened." He reached for her hands, finding them warm despite the storm. I'm saying that I love you, Evangeline Murphy. Not because it's convenient, not because it makes sense, but because you've shown me and my daughters what kindness looks like again. The tears on her cheeks mixed with raindrops. Ezra, I'm asking not for a marriage of convenience, not for an arrangement time, asking if you'll marry me because you want to, because you love us too. She was quiet for so long that Ezra began to fear he'd misread everything, that he'd ruined their practical solution with his foolish heart. But then she spoke, her voice strong and clear despite the storm. I fell in love with Clara's laugh first, she said, the way it sounds like wind chimes when she discovers something new, and Rose's stubborn little chin when she's trying not to cry. I fell in love with your daughters before I even understood what was happening. She looked up at him, her grey eyes bright with unshed tears and something that looked remarkably like joy. And then I fell in love with the way you look at them, like they're the most precious things in the world. The way you worry about whether they're happy, whether they miss their mother too much, whether you're enough for them. Evangeline ... Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you, Ezra Blackwood. Not because I need a home, though I do. Not because you need help with your daughters, though you do. I'll marry you because somehow, in the middle of all this practicality, I found something I never expected to find again. What's that? Love, she whispered. Real, true, overwhelming love. He kissed her then, on the porch of the boarding house, while the storm raged around them. It wasn't their wedding kiss that would come later, when the creek receded and the preacher could cross the bridge. But it was something more important. It was the moment two people stopped pretending they were settling for less than their hearts desired, when they finally pulled apart, both breathless and laughing. Evangeline noticed something that made her smile even wider. Ezra, she said, pointing toward the window. Look. He turned to see two small faces pressed against the glass of the boarding house parlor. Clara and Rose, who had apparently convinced Mrs. Henderson to let them watch the storm. They were grinning widely, Clara clapping her hands silently, Rose bouncing on her toes with excitement. How long do you think they've been watching? Evangeline asked, waving at the girls. Probably since I rode up, Ezra admitted, chuckling. Clara's got a romantic heart, and Rose has been wanting a mother since the day her own passed. They stood together in the rain, watching his daughters celebrate through the window, and Ezra realized that sometimes the most practical thing you can do is follow your heart. Sometimes what you need and what you want turn out to be the same thing, after all. The storm would pass, the creek would recede, they would have their wedding when the time was right, but the real beginning, the moment when three separate, wounded hearts became one family, had already happened on a rain-soaked porch in the middle of a Wyoming storm. And as Evangeline would later tell their grandchildren, it was the most beautiful proposal she could have imagined, even if it came with thunder and lightning instead of flowers and music, because sometimes love arrives not in perfect moments, but in the midst of storms, when two people are brave enough to stop pretending that settling for less is enough, and bold enough to reach for everything their hearts truly desire.